We are now going to be looking at question number 2 of assignment 2. So, during the teaching experience, your mentor teacher gives you the cartoon below to design a multimodal lesson for the grade 11 learners. Study the cartoon carefully, then using the cartoon as a resource, answer the questions. So, multimodal and grade 11 learners, very important. Now, choose one of the teaching approaches to literature. Please, it must be an approach to literature, not a general teaching approach, but an approach to literature that you can use in connection with the above cartoon. Okay, so you must think about what approach you could use when you are teaching the above cartoon. Discuss the approach. So you need to really show that you've understood this approach. And then justify why this approach is suitable to use with this visual text. So that means you have to provide very, very specific reasons why this is a good approach to use for this cartoon. And then, and this is very important, please don't leave this bit out, provide practical examples for your justification. So you said this is why this is a good approach. Now you need to explain and provide examples of how that would work in a real life classroom. So practical means something that you would actually use in a classroom. And once again, please be very, very specific with your answers. You must explain. You don't just say, it's good because it shows the ideas of the poem, of the cartoon. That doesn't tell us anything. What do you mean by that? Okay, so it must be practical and it must be specific. So the teaching approach is accurately and clearly explained using appropriate educational terminology. So you have to show that you understand and you know how to use educational terminology. What you don't want to do is go too far with this. Your answer has to be readable. It has to make sense. You're not just going to throw in every educational term that you can find and make it unclear and difficult to read. So you have to show that you understand the real life terminology, the practical terminology, the terminology we use when we're discussing approaches to literature. The justification demonstrates strong insight into visual literacy and learner engagement. So when you explain why this is a good approach, you need to show that you understand visual literacy and learner engagement. So that is the focus of your reasons why this is a good approach, because you can see very clearly how that approach is going to be used to enhance the teaching of visual literacy. So you have to understand visual literacy, and you have to explain how this is going to get learners to actively engage with that visual literacy. And then multiple, well-contextualized classroom examples are provided, clearly linked to the cartoon. Okay, so it has to be multiple, it can't just be one. Well contextualized, so you've explained exactly how to use it. You are not just saying, well, I'll use some images. Okay, well, what does that mean? And you want to clearly link it to this specific cartoon. Okay, so that's question 2.1. Now, question 2.2. The lesson conclusion is often incorrectly viewed as the point in the lesson for learners to provide responses to an activity, for the teacher to give homework and instructions to pack up for break. Explain the importance and purpose of a lesson conclusion. So the importance and, of course, the purpose. Now, do not fall into that trap of taking other people's ideas and just regurgitating what other people have said. That doesn't show me that you've understood a lesson conclusion. So the way you approach this is you write down everything you can think of first, and only then do you go look for sources. So provide a well-developed explanation of the lesson conclusion that includes consolidation, reflection, informal assessment, and preparation for subsequent learning. Now, clearly you've been given information here about what goes on in a lesson conclusion. Therefore, the marks are not going to be given for identifying those things or just listing those things. What you need to do is you need to explain the importance and the purpose of these things in a lesson. Okay, so you're not just going to say these are the things it does. That doesn't show me that you've really understood how that works in real life. Okay, so you really need to look at why are we doing it, why is it important, and then you need to make clear links to learner understanding and progression. So for consolidation, you explain what it is, why it's important, and then how that links to this idea of learner understanding and progression. Okay, so there is plenty for you to unpack over there. Now, question 2.3. If you are not enjoying this, then your students aren't going to enjoy the PowerPoint. So if you find it very boring to make and you're not excited about this at all, that's a big problem and it's going to come across in your PowerPoint. There are so many tools available to you to create really fantastic PowerPoints. So go do some looking up, fall down a couple of rabbit holes, use the different tools, and really create something that you wish you had had when you were in high school. So create an engaging, suitable presentation using an application such as PowerPoint with about 6 to 7 slides. Now, you really can't do this in under 6 slides. So if you've got 5 slides, most likely your presentation is too thin, it's lacking. If you are going to 9 slides, okay, now we're pushing it. 10 slides, you're really pushing it. Okay, over 10 slides, that's not about 7. Okay, so please do use your common sense here. 7, if you go into 8, that's fine. 9 is okay. But you shouldn't be going over 9 at all. Your presentation must be well laid out with an appropriate theme and visuals. Okay, so with the layout, it has to be interesting. It also needs to be very readable. So don't forget, you are dealing with diverse learners. Some like text, some like visuals. So you don't want it to be overcrowded and too powerful and too in your face. You don't want it to be too heavy on the text, but you also don't want it to be too light on the text. And very, very important, a lot of people forget this bit, an appropriate theme. So you have to look at what it is that you are teaching. And the visuals and the layout must be clearly linked to this cartoon that you are teaching. Okay, so you're not going to have puppies and rainbows. They might be very pretty, but they're not linked to this text at all. Now, this one. Please make sure you have all of these: grade, topic, theme. Now, caps aligned LOs, very, very important. Your LOs need to be specific. So you go to the caps document, you find the LO, but it says caps aligned, not caps copied. So you're not going to take the LOs in the caps and just copy paste them into this presentation. So, for example, if it says use understand figures of speech. Now, that is far too vague. So you would have to say, identify metaphors, similes, and personification in the given poem and explain how they enhance the poem's meaning. That is a specific LO, for example. So you want to say, what do they need to do at the end of this lesson with this text? So you're going to take the general and you're going to explain exactly what they need to do. So it must be very, very specific. Now, this information to support learners with interpreting cartoons. So this is your information part. Now, you want this to be a recap, but you really want it to be useful. So things like linking it to the cartoon, giving examples, providing explanations that the learners can understand. So they really have to be able to use this by reading it, getting exactly what you mean, seeing a relevant example. Now, you don't have space to do everything, so you're only going to choose the most important things. But please don't only choose like 2. Okay, that's not that helpful. So you want to make sure that you have looked at this cartoon as well and decided what are the most important, what's the most important information that they're going to need to interpret cartoons. Now, this one, please do not forget that. A copy of the cartoon. Okay, it's important that you have it. This. Pair work, so it must be pair work, introductory activity. Post-reading assessment activity to assess learners' understanding and interpretation of the cartoon. Now, I really want to encourage you to be creative with this. Think, pair, share activities. Yeah, they're great. They work. But the 120th think, pair, share activity, I can't help but think, is there anything else we could have done? It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It works well. But is there anything else? You know, if you're going to do that, you have to really consider, how are you going to make this different to the 5 other think, pair, share activities they might have done in this school day? So you want to, if you're going to use a traditional activity, you want to consider, how do I elevate it to something really engaging? You want to be creative. You want to think outside the box a bit. Of course, very, very important, it needs to align with the requirements. So it has to line up with the cartoon that has been given, has to line up with the approach to teaching literature that you've decided, has to do what a pre-reading introductory task does. Okay, so it's a lot to bear in mind, but this is your chance to really be creative and to do something enjoyable. You want an activity that you are excited to be running. Okay, and it's the same thing with the post-reading activity. Yes, questions are good. They're not bad. It's not wrong to do questions at all. But think about ways you can scaffold them, make them more interesting. You really want to get the learners excited to do this activity. So even if you're just doing questions, you really need to bring some creativity. And then you need to make sure that they align with the approach, that they cover the learning outcomes, and that it assesses the understanding and interpretation. Okay, so you're looking at what does it need to do, what is its purpose, and how can I make it interesting and engaging? Then you have to have your conclusion. So you've just done a question on what a conclusion is, and part of the conclusion is a link for the quiz. Okay, so that link does have to work, and you want to not just put a slide with a link on it, you actually need to have a slide that concludes the presentation. So let's look at this. Slides are visually engaging, well-balanced, and learner-friendly. Okay, so you look at it and yes, it's pleasant to look at. It's learner-friendly, so it's not over the top, it's not complicated, and well-balanced. So you need to look at design principles. No overcrowding, no, not too many colors, not too many visuals, but not just blank things. I'm going to give you a hint. Those designs on PowerPoint where you just go on the theme, those are not well designed. Okay, so rather find your own thing and then get design suggestions, but don't just go for the typical PowerPoint design and not do anything with it, because those are not great designs. So you have to look at it. And with this, it's also a case of being sensible. You can see how it looks. You can see if it's going to overwhelm someone. You can see if it's going to bore them to tears. So just be sensible about it. And then design choices enhance comprehension. So the way you've set it out will help the learners understand and model good multimodal practice. Okay, so you need to think about the fact that you are incorporating multimodality into this. So what are the things I need to bear in mind when I am using multimodality? Lesson information and alignment. All lesson details are clearly presented. Learning outcomes are explicitly aligned and clearly inform the lesson activities that follow. Okay, so they need to be very specific, and I need to be able to see how each LO is assessed or covered in the activities. Learner support and scaffolding. Information is well scaffolded, clearly explained, and encourages critical thinking. Okay, so remember scaffolding, you're starting from the basic principles and you're moving out, you're providing lots of support, and you're slowly withdrawing that support so they can work on their own. Must be clearly explained and must make them think. Learners are guided to interpret symbolism, bias, and message in the cartoon. Okay, so I'm looking specifically, have you covered those things in this presentation? And then including the visual. So if you don't include the cartoon, you're not getting those 2 marks. Remember, a mark is a percent. So pick up as many marks as you can. A mark here, a mark there makes a difference. So cartoon is clearly included and visible to learners. Okay, great. But if you want to elevate it, cartoon is clearly included and meaningfully integrated into lesson activities and discussion. So you don't just slap the cartoon in there, you think about how do I include this cartoon in a way that it integrates with the activities and discussions. Okay. Then your lesson introduction. Activity is creative, well-structured, strongly activates prior knowledge. So you must have this activation of prior knowledge in your activity. Promotes meaningful discussion and prepares learners for deeper interpretation. So when you are designing this, please remember that these are grade 11 learners. Some are excited to be there, some aren't. So just saying, discuss what you know about cartoons, that's not really encouraging meaningful engagement. You will find that 90% of them after 1 minute will stop and stare at you because they haven't been led to a way to discuss something in a way that is actually useful and meaningful to them. So you really have to consider, how are you going to get them to really discuss this topic? And then your post reading actively encourages higher order thinking, including inference, evaluation, and interpretation of message, bias, and purpose. Okay, remember your information included message, bias, and purpose. So this is where you really want to look at your scaffolding, because you don't want to make it complicated so that your learners can't actually engage with what you have got going on. But you don't want to make it too simple. So it's not just, okay, what do you see? Or what is the girl doing? Okay, you can start with that, but you need to build up to these higher order questions, and you need to provide the guidance to show them how they can get to higher order thinking. So please think very carefully about how you're going to frame this activity, how you can guide them, how you can get diverse learners to higher order thinking, and how you can keep them entertained while doing it. And then your lesson conclusion clearly consolidates learning and smoothly transitions learners to the quiz as an assessment tool. So there has to be that transition. So you have to show, okay, you don't just have a link in your presentation and like no integration into the lesson at all. Okay, so it sounds like there is a huge amount you need to do, but it is a case of just thinking things through carefully. So much of this is, you ask yourself, how can I know if my design is good? Just look at it. Is it engaging? Are you interested in it? Do you like it? Now ask yourself, would someone else like it? If the answer is no, then you need to go and work on that design. Is it too complicated? Read it out loud and think about a grade 11. Remember, that's a 16, 17-year-old. Some of them are going to be really good at English. Some of them are going to really struggle with English. So you need to scaffold these activities to make sure everyone has a chance to learn. And then question 2.4, using any suitable online, so it must be online, not Google Docs or Google Forms, to create a quiz with 10 to 12 questions, not 9, not 13. And you're concluding your lesson from that question. So it's not just any questions. It must be the questions from your lesson that you just presented. So you need to think about what a conclusion does. You need to go back to your LOs and check that your questions are assessing the LOs. Now, what does it need? Variety of question types. Okay, so it can't just be one type of question. Scaffolded, promote fun and healthy competition. Okay, so you have to, if you look at it in the all multiple choice, it's not a variety. Well scaffolded, so you start off with the lower order questions and then you build up. Is it fun? Are the kids going to enjoy it? And is it competitive? So there has to be an element of competition. Ensure your LOs are assessed. Okay, very important. And then include the link, and you must include the screenshots. Okay. Cannot emphasize this enough. If you do not include screenshots, if you only include the link and the link is broken, I cannot give you any marks because it's not there. So you're providing screenshots of each question, feedback that the learners will receive for each question. So what I want to mention here is, yes, we all know what is Kahoot. I'm not saying that Kahoot is a bad application, but I want you to really think, am I going to be the 39th person who does a Kahoot quiz? Does this really show creativity? Does this provide enough scope to do everything I need it to do? I'm not saying Kahoot is bad. It's a fantastic tool. But remember, this is your assessment activity. This is your standout activity. So you really want this to be sort of the pull out the stops and show off your best. So is Kahoot a application that you would use every day, or is it your real creative one? Not saying don't use it, I'm just saying think about it carefully. So, structure and progression. Wide range of questions with strong scaffolding that supports engagement, challenge, and progression. So you really want to think about the questions that you are choosing. Quiz questions comprehensively assess learning outcomes and reinforce lesson objectives. Then, feedback is constructive and supports learning. Quiz design promotes motivation and competition. Okay, so if they're falling out of the competition, if they get the second answer wrong, that's not competitive. That's not something that they're going to enjoy because, you know, that's A, not well scaffolded, and B, where's the motivation to keep going? But, sorry, to go back to feedback, it needs to be constructive. So it needs to be something that they can actively use. It needs to support learning. So you can't just say, great job, try again. That doesn't tell them anything. And then clear evidence of all required elements is provided. Okay, so what that means is I can clearly see everything. So the link works, the screenshots are clear. I don't have to squiz. Remember, if I can't see it, I can't mark it. There is one thing, one very important thing I want to talk about for lesson 2.3. This is for you to use in the classroom. This is the learner-facing presentation. So you are not going to include notes to the teacher. You're not going to include notes to the marker. This is the presentation that you will put up on the projector for the learners to see. Okay, so you don't need to explain anything in notes to me or to a teacher that's going to use it. It has to be for the learners. Okay, if you need to explain something to the marker, then it's not doing its job because it needs to be self-explanatory. So for the learners. Okay, and that is question 2.